Perfect. Well, first, thank you so much for having me in today's virtual conference. It really is a pleasure to be here. As mentioned, I'm Anna Dowson. I'm the Senior Director of Sustainability for GreenScale, and I'm here today to talk about sustainability and AI. So I think we're all acutely aware that our sector has been growing rapidly and consuming perhaps quite visibly a lot of power and resources. So I'll start my presentation today diving a little bit into data center energy trends. And I appreciate energy is just one part of the sustainability puzzle, but I am limited to half an hour today, maybe less now with all the technical issues. And if I were to try and cover all the potential aspects that AI and sustainability can impact on each other, I'd need about 30 days. So the focus of today's session will be very much on energy, not fully, but a lot on it. So as I mentioned, I'll start looking at energy trends in data centers globally. I'll then move into talking around the impact of AI growth in those trends and where we think we might be heading. And then we will start looking at how can we leverage AI to drive sustainable growth. And there will be a number of different kind of facets of those discussions. We'll look at specifically within the data center sector in our industry. We'll look at how AI can impact on power grids, and then briefly talk about the impact on potentially other sectors as well. And we'll close with a bit of a food for thought on what we need to do to go ahead going forward. So starting with our energy use trends, I'll take us back in time a little bit to the early 2000s. So back in the early 2000s, we'll see this graph. This graph's looking at electricity consumption for data centers in the US specifically. But as we'll see in the first 5 years, so between 2000 and 2005, there was about a doubling in electricity consumption for data centers in the US. And that started ringing alarm bells to the industry. And in 2007, the Environment Protection Agency published a report, a fairly apocalyptic report, where this graph comes from, suggesting that if we did nothing, it was very likely that the electricity consumption for data centers would double in another 6 odd years. And there were a number of other reports. There was a fairly apocalyptic report that suggested that by 2030, data centers would use about 60% of all the industrial sector's equivalent of electricity consumption in the US. And this really was the beginning of, let's say, a period of transformation for the industry. What followed was a significant improvement in the efficiency of data centers. So this graph is showing specifically PUE. PUE as a metric was launched around this time by the Green Grid, but the improvement was much more multifaceted than just PUE. So we started that transition from kind of old, inefficient, usually inefficient enterprise data centers to co-location environments, hyperscalers, and that drove a lot of efficiency improvement. We saw efficiency improvements in servers and storage devices, as well as the data center infrastructure. We saw server virtualization, and we saw more efficient chips coming to the market. And that resulted in a significant improvement in the efficiency of data centers globally. It got to around 2018, and those efficiency improvements started to plateau. And it is really not a surprise that when we then look at historic consumption, electricity consumption for data centers, as well as capacity globally, that it is around 2018 when we start seeing an increase in consumption. So what those 10 odd years where we were driving efficiency improvements were doing was it was mitigating some of the growth in the sector. So that growth for increased digital services was being mitigated from an electricity consumption perspective by the efficiencies we were driving. And then around 2018, when we started plateauing the efficiency improvements, electricity consumption globally started rocketing. And let's say, fortunately or unfortunately, AI then joined the party a couple of years ago. And that's where we start seeing an even more rapid increase in global electricity consumption for data centers. So the impact of AI growth. So I probably don't need to preach to the converted. We are all in this conference today because we know AI is having a big impact on not just our sector, but globally. But I really like this graph. And this graph has come from a very recently published report by the International Energy Agency. And it suggests that generative AI, the adoption rate of generative AI has been much faster than even that of personal computers and internet. So in about 2 years, we're reaching an adoption rate of about 40%. The internet took more than twice the time to get to a 40% adoption rate. And that to me really is an impactful graph, just showing how quickly AI is being adopted and implemented across the world. So it feels like we've been here before, back to the early 2000s, and we're seeing this huge concern around the rise in electricity demand off the back of this AI growth, as well as the broader digital growth and continued development of data centers. And this headline is one that I think is quite, quite starking. So just the GPUs sold last year, well, actually, this would have been 2023 alone, would have been enough to power 1.3 million homes. I mean, having crunched the numbers, I think there was a bit of, let's say, creative license in how the numbers were extrapolated. It is very much a very pessimistic scenario. But there is no running away from the fact that AI is power hungry and that it will require a lot of energy to run, and if we continue adopting AI at the rate we are. So let's see what the current forecasts are telling us and what the future might hold. So again, this graph's coming from this report, the International Energy Agency report, which if anyone has trouble sleeping and wants to have a nice read late at night sometime, it is a really good report. If for any geeks out there who loves graphs, there is a billion graphs, and it is a really, really good report. And what the IEA have done is similarly to what happened back in the 2000s, trying to forecast where we're likely to hit this time by 2035 in terms of global electricity demand for data centers. And we see like a worst case scenario where electricity consumption quadruples by 2035, which is the liftoff case. On a headwinds case, which is absolutely the best case scenario, we plateau at around 2% of global electricity consumption. And then we have the more middle of the road scenarios, which is the base case and the high efficiency case, which gets us to about 3% of global electricity demand. What I think is particularly interesting when we look, one of the things I really like about this graph is that they are identifying a potential about 15% reduction between the base case and the high efficiency case in terms of opportunities that can be driven by improved efficiencies of data centers. And I know we looked at the PUE graph, we've plateaued, but that's not to say we've taken all the efficiency out. And 15% is still quite a bit to go at, something worth going at. But in my opinion, it will be stacking up lots of little opportunities rather than a single bullet. And I do genuinely think AI will have a role to play in unlocking some of this optimization that could drive some of this 15% opportunity just there. The next question we absolutely need to ask ourselves is, where will this power come from, right? Because if we're powering all these new data centers from renewables, then we don't really have as much of a problem from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective. Let's park embodied carbon for now, but certainly operationally. And the IEA, again, have done some number crunching in terms of forecasting and where they believe the power will come to power these additional data centers. And they believe about half of it will come from renewable sources, which is reassuring. And, half's not an immaterial amount. But let's face it, it is very likely we will still need some baseload generation, be it natural gas, be it coal. Maybe in Asia, we're likely to see coal still having a role to play, or even nuclear. I don't have enough time to dive into nuclear today. It will definitely need to be a conversation for another day. But we will need some sort of baseload generation. And ultimately, we do need to be striving for as much renewable as possible, right? And to do that, there's one key word here: location. Where are we going to locate these new data centers? And this graph, again, from the same report, shows a bit of the growth of the data center clusters across the world. And we have historically been building data centers in these clusters, and they have served us well. they've been where the demand has been, where it's been convenient, but we really need to start changing the status quo here. And if we look at where these blue circles are and where abundant renewable energy is, there's a bit of a mismatch there. And we need to face into that mismatch if we're going to try and continue to grow our data centers in a sustainable way. And perhaps even more importantly, as we'll all know, this kind of very targeted growth is putting a huge amount of pressure on local grids. And there are embargoes, active embargoes, as we'll know. So this is not nice to have. It's not, oh, we've got to do it because it's the right thing for the planet. If we don't start thinking about location more seriously, we will genuinely not be able to continue growing our sector. And ultimately, we need to start supporting local grids. We need to start moving away from just being a burden on local grids to supporting it. All other big players that consume vast amounts of energy like us or have a significant impact in local grids, they have a responsibility towards local grids, and they have to respect the stability of the grid. Why should data centers be different? We absolutely need to have a role to play here, and we can. So how can we start supporting local grids? So firstly, we need to start co-locating our data centers with energy assets. And that can be solar, that could be wind, that could be battery storage. And in doing that, we can help reduce the burden on the local grid. That's really simple. And we are helping with that transition towards renewable energy sources globally. We can provide that additionality. And you see hyperscalers really pushing the boundaries there, some more through corporate PPAs, but some actually on site and co-located renewable generating assets. Perhaps more importantly, we need to configure our data centers so that we can use our on-site generation and our backup generation and hopefully battery storage as well to help reduce the strain on the grid at times of stress. So instead of hoarding that capacity all to ourselves, we can use our local power to drop off the grid at a time where the grid really needs that help. And that all sounds well and good. And I am sure everyone is going like, yeah, Anna, great. But that's really not simple. And it is not simple, but it has to be done. I genuinely don't believe we can continue to build data centers in any other way. And to do that, we need to start engaging with local networks and the energy industry as a whole from a really early stage. We need coherent planning. That will be key. And perhaps taking us back to AI, we will need something really clever to help us orchestrate this shift, orchestrate what gets used when, what gets charged, discharged, where the supply, where the demand is coming from, and modeling all of those network constraints to optimize the operation. And AI will have a role to play in that. So we kind of go full circle. Now, looking at how we can leverage AI for sustainability more broadly. So we talked a little bit about how certainly I believe AI will have a role to play in driving more efficiency improvements in the data center infrastructure, how AI will have a role to play in helping orchestrate the different assets we have within the local grid infrastructure. One thing I get quite passionate about is how AI can help unlock heat reuse opportunities. So kind of looking beyond just electricity and looking at energy as a whole and the vast amounts of waste heat that data centers generate. So with all the innovative cooling and alternative cooling technologies that are coming into the market in response to the high density computing, we will very likely, and I'd almost say undoubtedly, have higher grade heat being wasted or made available from our data centers. And that higher grade heat makes the business case for heat reuse much more appealing. Again, appreciate much easier said than done. If you happen to be developing a data center next to an existing district heating network or where a district heating network is planned, wonderful. You can use that heat and power local communities, power local businesses. But I appreciate it's not always that simple. But again, it ties back to that early engagement with local authorities, energy networks, because you can genuinely seek to use that as one of your deciding factors in site selection. And the opportunity for generating positive impacts in the local communities can be huge. And that is something I really, really am passionate about. And then looking beyond just the local energy infrastructure, taking the lens broader and looking at national grids. Again, AI, in my opinion, will have a humongous role to play on how we optimize and decarbonize national grids. So we all know electrification is happening at a very fast pace. And at the same time, grids are also having to switch to intermittent and non-dispatchable renewable energy sources. All of that means that national grids and grid operators will have a huge optimization task in their hand. They need to maximize yield, they need to reduce cost, and they need to ensure security of supply. AI can help with all of that. And I'm going to try and paint a little bit of a picture on how AI can do that. Please bear with me. I promise I won't take too long. So the first thing that AI can do is help predict the weather. It can predict the weather better than we've been able to historically. And in predicting the weather, we can have better visibility and forecast for example, wind and solar generation. And at the same time, we can have a better forecast for demand, for the demand that's linked to weather, such as heating and cooling loads. We can then use that more like the enhanced weather forecast to help conduct network analysis. And in understanding a little bit more what's likely to come our way from a supply and demand, we can help optimize distribution, transmission, storage. And what that can do is prevent us from having to run expensive peaker plants, for example, or even curtailment costs where we have wind generating assets, for example, that might need to be paid to turn off because we don't have the capacity to distribute or transmit that to where the electricity is needed. That will hopefully mean cheaper electricity for everyone. And then on the point of price and cost, AI can also help get these price signals, the insights from price signals off the back of the network analysis to further optimize dispatchable loads. And an example I like to think about is if you have an electric vehicle at home, and if, like me, you want to try and charge your car as cheaply as possible, but you want to make sure that when you wake up in the morning, there's enough juice in your battery to get you to work or wherever you need to be, AI can absolutely be your best friend. So you will plug your car and hopefully just let AI run it so that you're charging it at the time where the electricity is cheapest and that you're also taking that strain out from the grid and knowing your patterns of, how far do you need to drive to get to work, or if you're going to charge your car at work or you're not, AI can make sure that your battery is charged to where it needs to be by a certain time when you need to leave home, hopefully a little bit earlier than that. So again, AI has an opportunity to drive significant value. And what I truly believe is when we look at it as the whole system and national grids, what AI optimization can do is try and drive as much of benefit to as many stakeholders as possible for most of the time. And that can genuinely drive a positive impact to society overall. Finally, looking further out and other sectors, I had the joy of coming across this report called Artificial Intelligence for a Climate Change Mitigation Roadmap that was published last year. And I'm not joking, it's a 334-page report. I did not read it all, but I certainly dived quite deeply into it. And I found it fascinating that for every imaginable sector, there are many ways in which AI can drive improvements in efficiency or genuinely help mitigate the effects of climate change. It is eye-watering and it is so exciting. And we have to think about it. When we look about AI and sustainability, we do need to think beyond our sector, right? So thinking of a fairly simple example around electrical vehicles, and an example I used just a little bit earlier as well. Hopefully AI can help us, ensure that we're running and charging our EVs in the most cost-effective way and in a way that we're not straining the grid unnecessarily. But if we can use AI to help, and I genuinely believe we can use AI to help take down some of the barriers to adoptions of EV. And let's say it could be your range anxiety. If AI can help you make sure that you always know where you can charge and if that charger is available or if it's not down for maintenance, and it can help drive down the operational costs. For example, there are companies out there using AI to improve the manufacturing process of batteries, which could then drive the cost down for cars, and that could be another barrier into the adoption of EV. And if AI can help us break down some of the barriers to the adoption of electric vehicles, that could speed up the decarbonization of transport and reduce greenhouse gas emissions overall. Which leads to this fantastic quote from Michael Liebridge. I'm not sure I know how to say his last name properly. So he was the founder of Bloomberg NEF. And according to him, if AI helps bring forward the electrification of heating, transport, and industry by a single year, that would more than offset any negative impact from its own relatively limited power demand. I'll let that sink in because I think this is so important. Sometimes I think as a sector, we think very inward and just the impact that we can have. And externally, people think, oh, data centers are these power hungry monsters and, aren't they destroying the world? But we're here predominantly to enable something else. And if we're using our power to enable AI, which can eventually and perhaps more rapidly help decarbonize other industries. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that something that we can be proud of, that as a sector, we're enabling that kind of acceleration of decarbonization? That fills me with hope, but I'm a bit of an optimist. So finally, what do we need to do to hopefully tap into these opportunities I've raised? So we need to start by including energy networks in our site selection process for data centers. So that has to be looking at how we can, as I mentioned, being co-located to energy assets, batteries, hopefully renewable energy sources, and having that really early engagement with local energy players. We need to start being grid participants. We need to stop just being takers. We need to start playing nicely with the grids we operate in and genuinely use our assets to help the local grids. We then need to hopefully use AI to help optimize and orchestrate those microgrids we're creating and the energy assets within our control and within the local network controls to take the burden away and help speed up the decarbonization. And then finally, hopefully, by delivering AI-ready infrastructure, we can enable the decarbonization of other sectors. So that's me. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for that. And it's always so interesting to hear about how AI, because it gets such a bad rap about, it's a drain on the grid, but actually there are all these technologies that it is helping enable, so it can be less of a drain and actually positive for the future. And I adore AI, but then maybe I should because I write about the industry day in, day out, so I can see the positives. It's about, I think the main issue is communicating those positives to other people. Unfortunately, we haven't really got much time for questions, but hopefully that's okay with you. And obviously, if anyone has a question, then they had your details there and they can share them. And if they missed that, then they can always ask us and we will make sure to pass them your way. Perfect. Thank you so much, Anna. Really appreciate that session and have a great day.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.